Hi, this is Kaustu with Integral Audio, and today we're going to be talking about the Talkback Limiter developed by Korneff Audio. Now this is an emulation of a Talkback Limiter found in analog consoles. A talkback is a channel dedicated for communication between the audio engineer or the recordist and the performing artists. So the limiter that was used in that channel is a talkback limiter. Now let's have a look at the user interface of the emulation by Korneff Audio. The 4 LEDs at the top are power indicators, and typically you'll want all of them to be turned on. The Listen Mic button turns the limiter on and off. The Listen 1 knob is basically an input gain, so the more you increase it, the more the sound is going to be compressed. The dB compression meter shows how much compression is being applied to your audio. The Analog button turns the emulation of the analog console on and off. This does not add any kind of noise to your mix. However, if you have it turned on, the emulation will continue working regardless of the state of your Listen Mic button. There are two input options, line and mic. The mic adds a gigantic 30 dB gain, while the line does not do anything to your input at all. Other than that, you have your standard blend and makeup knobs. And if you click on the Korneff logo here, you will find several other options. There is a distortion trim with two options depending on which way you turn it, an FET bias which acts like yet another input gain, a low pass filter for getting some really cool lo-fi sound, oversampling option, and a GUI zoom. Alright, now let's take a listen. First off, the dry audio. Now I'm going to turn on the analog emulation, and I want you to focus on the hi-hats. To me, what it sounds like is a decrease in around 7 or 8 kilohertz. Now let's turn on the compression, but without any analog emulation. It instantly adds a sort of gritty and pumping sound to it. Now I'm going to play the compressed audio again, but this time I'm going to be turning the analog emulation on and off so that you can hear the difference. Turning on the analog console emulation is actually pretty cool. Along with retaining the originality of the actual console, the emulation also took away some of the harsh, distorted high frequencies that were getting introduced because of the compression. Setting the input to mic adds a huge amount of gain, so the sound becomes super compressed and snappy. Personally, I think I would use this for getting, super distorted yet warm vocal sound effects that could be used for maybe hip-hop or rock and so on. Now there's another cool way to get some noisy distortion out of this plugin. If you turn off one of the plus 18 volt or minus 18 volt LED button, then you will get this. Now let's take a look at the second page of this plugin. Now there are two kinds of distortion that you can create with the Distortion Trim knob. Honestly, I'm not sure that I hear that big of a difference between the two, and any that I do could very much well be placebo. As for the FET bias, it just adds some more input gain, so the more you increase it, the more compression you're gonna get. The low-pass filter is quite run-of-the-mill, and even if it does help to create a lo-fi vibe, it is certainly nothing special. Now let's take a look at the oversampling feature of this plugin. I wanted to make sure that it is doing what it's saying, so what I did was open up Plugin Doctor and put this plugin into it, and here's what I got. By default, the plugin adds a low-pass filter that begins to roll off high-end from around 8 kHz. And adding any kind of oversampling to this does absolutely nothing. This means that you can just turn the oversampling off and let your CPU breathe in ease. Now let's take a listen to a piece of music that I made using this limiter. There are 4 tracks in total, however I've used the Korneff Talkback Limiter in only 3 of them. Here's the music without the limiter. Now with the limiters enabled. What it seems to add is some distortion, and it brings all the instruments up close. It's extremely noticeable on the drums, which sounds punchier. The treble has definitely been modified as well. And honestly, it does sound quite nice. You might have noticed that I added some distortion trim on the bass, which made it a bit easier to translate. I can actually see that feature being used in 808 bass as well. For the guitar, I'm not really a fan of what it did to it, so I probably won't be using it that much. However, for the sake of cohesiveness, you could add the limiter into your track and not enable the compressor, but just let the analog emulation do its thing. Just make sure to remove the low-pass filter, unless you want it, of course. In conclusion, I think it's a great limiter that accurately captures the vibe of analog consoles. It definitely sounds great in drums and could be useful for creating creative sound effects. I don't really see it being used that much on softer music, but for electronic or rock music, this could be your favorite weapon of choice for punchy sounds. And that's it for the video. If you found it helpful, consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. The link to the plugin is in the description below, and I hope you join us in our next video. This isn't exactly a part of the review, but we're going to be looking at a few other things that I found while exploring this plugin. When the blend knob is turned fully to the left, the audio is completely flat and there is no coloration whatsoever. As soon as I turn up the blend, we get a high-pass filter and a low-pass filter. The low-pass can be modified using the low-pass adjustment knob that we found on the other page of this limiter. Now let's enable the analog emulation and see what happens. Okay, now that's something. It added 7.2 decibel at 34 Hz. And it lowered 8 kHz by 5.2 decibel. While the rest of the frequency spectrum went down by a decibel as well. And does it do anything else other than that? Well, I did check to see if it added any harmonics when I turned on the analog emulation. And while it does make a bit of a difference, I honestly think that you could just get the same effect if you used an equalizer. But hey, it's just a digital analysis, so if you like the sound of it, then you should just go for it. Aside from the analog emulation, the limiter itself, the distortion, The noises that it can create, they are pretty great. However, yeah, it does seem to cater to a more niche market. If you have found a cool use for this plugin, then let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts and opinions as well.